What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. The Sooners Illustrated podcast, episode 147 on this Wednesday, January 22nd, 2024. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy with you on a Wednesday, or with you a day early. Both Collin and I are tied up with some other things later this week, so we figure let's hit the show a day early on Wednesday. Kind of works out a little bit too, because it'll let us get into the Jim Knowles saga, as it will forever be known. What's the latest there? We'll get into it, of course. That's the big story in OU football right now. We will discuss right off the top of the show. Big recruiting weekend coming up for you as well. Junior Day weekend. A lot of guys will be descending upon Norman, the right guy to talk to about that and preview a little bit, of course, here with our great Collin Kennedy. We'll break that down a little bit. Preview. Also, Oklahoma's been doing some in-home visits. Want to recap some of the latest there. So a lot of recruiting news to get into as well on a Wednesday as we start to really shift back into some good old-fashioned high school recruiting, moving off of the portal cycle as we move into winter and into spring and all that good stuff. But, Collin, of course, like I said, got to start with the biggest story in OU football right now. Of course, everyone wants to know what's the latest with Jim Knowles. So, obviously, the Ohio State defensive coordinator, Ohio State won the national title on Monday. Collin and I talked at length about Jim Knowles' candidacy for Oklahoma's defensive coordinator opening on the show last Thursday. Tom James and I talked about it a little more on Monday after he commented on it on Saturday. It's now been a couple more days. Obviously, we kind of felt like after the Natty would be when there started to be movement here because, he had another game to play, and he played well. Ohio State won the national title. Collin, obviously, this is what everyone is dialed into right now. We have our VIP chat on Wednesdays. Obviously, the Knowles questions have been flying, which was I think the first question you got was over under how many Jim Knowles questions you would get today.
Yep.
What's the latest, man? I mean, as we kind of let this thing start to really play out, it feels like now that we've come off the Natty on Monday night, there was that Tuesday where it was probably kind of a let the dust settle day. But now starting today, Wednesday, it feels like this is where you're going to start to get the movement, right? You're going to start to get, if Oklahoma's going to make it happen, they're going to make it happen soon. If Ohio State's going to retain him, that should become apparent as well in the next day, 2, 3. I mean, this week. What's your kind of sense of all of it right now as Oklahoma tries to fill this DC spot with the biggest fish possible in Jim Knowles?
I don't know. Let's move on to the next one. Anyway, no, I'm just joking. Look, there's a lot of moving pieces here, as you would expect, but this is kind of the figure it out moments of this process as we go along. And the way that I've kind of phrased it right now is informal talks that have taken place before this week are now, for lack of a better term, expected to be more formalized or formal in nature throughout the next few days. And I think the biggest note that I would probably share, the biggest point of emphasis going into whatever is about to come, like it really feels like when you talk to folks behind the scenes that the goal is to find some sort of resolution by the end of this week. Now, we're recording at around noon. I have no idea what's about to happen in the time span in which we record here and what announcements may or may not come, but it definitely feels like the goal at the very least is to have some sort of idea as to what the direction of this thing is for both Oklahoma and Ohio State. Obviously, Ohio State's fresh off that national title win. Ryan Day is praising Jim Knowles, the best defensive coordinator in the country. I believe, Josh, they just paid him a bonus through that national championship win of about $770,000. And there might be more where that came from out in Columbus. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about negotiations, the best defensive coordinator in the sport right now, for all intents and purposes, is going to command probably the top dollar in the sport, meaning whether it's Oklahoma or Ohio State, you have to feel like this thing is trending towards making Jim Knowles the highest paid assistant coach in college football.
Right.
Who that comes from, how that's structured, and where it inevitably leads him to, that's going to get figured out now and into the coming days. And Oklahoma, it just feels like, and we can go back and forth on some of the other layers to this, but it feels like Oklahoma legitimately has a shot at this thing. It's just about either pushing it across the finish line or getting an answer in a negative sense and then pivoting accordingly, because this program really needs to go ahead and figure out who is going to be the defensive coordinator in 2025.
Yeah, look, my kind of, I guess, final thoughts on this, because we're operating on the assumption that this is going to be, and I've said this, we've kind of felt this way, like it's getting close for a while now. So I'm hesitant to say it, I guess, but we all kind of feel like this is going to, by Monday when we have the next podcast, this is going to be, we're going to know, at least on the Jim Knowles part of it. Oh, you maybe necessarily won't have made a hire, possibly, but at least on the Jim Knowles end of it, we'll know. So my kind of final thought is, Oklahoma, from talking to people around the program, talking to you as we kind of talk, what have you been hearing? We kind of chat about it. Oklahoma at least thinks they have a shot. They're taking the shot. They're going to see what happens. And you may have articulated this on one of the podcasts or on the site. I can't remember. We talked about it so much. I don't think Oklahoma's sweating it either. It's one of those spots of, this was kind of a gravy thing. Like, it became an apparent as an option. Like, I don't think when Zach Alley left, the initial thought was, let's go get Jim Knowles. That's not the sense I've gotten. The sense I got was, oh, that could happen. That's something that could maybe happen. And they're making the run at him. I mean, why wouldn't you? He's the best defensive coordinator in college football right now. Like Collin just said, he probably will be the highest paid assistant coach after this is all said and done in the sport. So, I don't think if it doesn't go Oklahoma's way, I don't think it's not shutter the program. It's not panic mode by any means. It's kind of a gravy thing, and we'll see what can happen for Oklahoma. And, we talked about before, you can't land on your feet any better than that after Zach Alley leaves, if that's the way it goes. But if it doesn't go that way, Brent Venables probably steps into calling the defense again. He promotes from within, or maybe a Wes Goodwin becomes back on the table, and we'll see from there. But it's going to be fascinating. The questions that we can't know are probably what's going to be what's ultimately going to determine it. Like the money thing, does Jim Knowles, is he content taking a little less to come back to Oklahoma? How close does it need to be? Does he just like it there? I mean, who knows that? Does he like working with Ryan Day? I mean, those are questions that are impossible to know, and we talked about that yesterday, Collin, you and I planning the show out a little bit. I mean, there's just no way to know a couple of those X factors, because it's so much more intricate than just job for job. It's not just simply put, oh, he's leaving Ohio State to Oklahoma. That's weird. There are layers to anything, like Zach Alley leaving, like any number of things. Like, it's not always just cut and dry job to job. So I'm fascinated to see how it plays out. It feels like it's finally shaking out. Oklahoma feels like they've got a shot. Ohio State's going to counter and try to keep them. And then at the end of the day, which is, it's not great intel, I guess, at the end of the day, it's going to just be whatever Jim wants to do. And we'll see.
I think one thing that I want to put out there, and for this, I just want to talk about this situation because it's fascinating. It's like, I want to make it clear, every sense that I've gotten, although the best way to phrase it is like Oklahoma's taking the shot here. Like, Oklahoma's going to be aggressive. Oklahoma is prepared to make a sizable offer if it gets to that point. If Jim Knowles says, hey, I think I have a lot of interest in this, go ahead and outline what my contract structure would look like. Like, Oklahoma is preparing to make him an offer that he will have to refuse. Now, I think as we expand on this, and I'm curious to kind of pick your brain further on it as well, I think this is what makes this such a difficult situation to break down, is because this is a surprising sort of storyline to follow. I don't think anyone really had Jim Knowles in Oklahoma as a possibility on their bingo card. Exactly like you mentioned, there are a lot of questions we all don't know the answer to that are inevitably going to shape Jim Knowles' decision. Does he like his setup at Ohio State? Does he enjoy working with Ryan Day? Is he comfortable in his current setup being away from his fiance? And it sounds like there are other family members involved that at least make exploring this path to Oklahoma an option for Jim Knowles. Is he comfortable being up in Ohio State working with that head coach in that program? Or is he really interested in being closer to family? Is he interested in working with a defensive-minded head coach? Because he really has not worked with someone as high profile as Brent Venables. Do these discussions make these two mesh well together? Like, does it become sensible for them both? Is Jim Knowles willing to embrace essentially a leader of the defense mentality with someone who already leads this defense? And Brent Venables will probably need Jim Knowles to keep him in check to a degree, make sure he's overseeing the program in sort of the CEO fashion. And like, I think one thing that I personally think about too is, does Ohio State winning the national championship, with some of the personal reasoning that we've come to understand, baking in for Jim Knowles, does Ohio State winning the national championship for Jim Knowles kind of feel like all right, I did what I needed to do. I accomplished a personal goal. Now it might be best for me to take care of myself personally, since I attacked something professionally I've always wanted to. Is that a factor? I don't know the answer to. I think the last thing I would say on it is, it feels like what this is going to come down to, because Ohio State is going to counter with a sizable offer, whatever Oklahoma's looks like. The question I've just kind of been posing is, what is the offer? What is the number, or what is the structure of the contract have to look like for Jim Knowles to say, okay, this plus family or personal opportunity equals what Ohio State puts forth? And I don't know what that is. I don't know what that number has to be. I don't know what it is. Is Jim Knowles going to get assurances baked into his contract from Oklahoma, considering what 2025 might look like and everything that's at stake? I think that's another aspect of this too, because if you're going to go hire Jim Knowles, like, you kind of have to guarantee that guy, if you come move here closer to your family, we're going to make sure that you can stick around no matter what happens over the next calendar year or so. So, a couple other questions that come to mind for me. And again, I like, Jim Knowles just has to provide a lot of those answers for himself. And once he does, that's going to shape the way that this thing goes.
Absolutely agree with everything you said. Like you said, I mean, that's been one of the main questions people have had. Why would someone go where the situation is wobbly at the moment with coming off a rough season? Everyone knows Oklahoma needs to win in 2025, but Jim Knowles is a guy that probably would want to keep around if you did go to a new regime or whatever, So those are the questions that you can't really know. And like you said, look, I don't know Jim. I've never covered him. But people do, and the general thought on him is that he's a guy who embraces and likes a challenge. Like you said, Ohio State just won the national title, had an elite defense. Is that, in his mind, conquering a challenge? Now he sees a new one to go to Oklahoma and to do it there. Is that how he sees it?
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see. These are all the questions that, again, only Jim can answer. We can't get inside his brain, and we'll find out.
I have no idea. I give a lot of credit to Brent Venables and the Oklahoma Brass for even making this a thing.
Yeah.
No matter what the next few days look like, how this is going to go, give credit to Brent and OU's upper echelon of the administration for at least enticing him potentially to explore this. Because this is, you mentioned, it's probably the biggest storyline in Oklahoma's offseason. This right now is arguably one of the biggest storylines in college football's young offseason. And I'm fascinated to see how this goes, and I give Oklahoma a lot of props for even making this a thing.
It's out there now, too. Did you see the Pat McAfee clip?
Yeah.
Where he kind of mentioned it, and he it was just an offhand comment, but he kind of basically said, the rumors he's going to go to Oklahoma, and it was like, okay, so clearly it was the day after the national championship game. Clearly, the whispers of it were around Atlanta, so like it's out there. It's in the ether. It's floating, so yeah, we'll see.
I can 100% confirm this is being talked about out there in Atlanta, and by a lot of different people. And through those conversations, I think that this notion was given a little bit more credit. So take that for what you will,
Right. And no, we've been on the other end of it. I mean, we just did this with Zach Alley, where it was the West Virginia thing. It just kind of kept being around. It was like, is this a thing? It just kind of kept floating, and lo and behold, he ended up going. And will it be the same way here? We'll see. But hopefully we can be with you whenever that does happen or doesn't happen or whatever. Also, we'll discuss it at length, and the coverage will be there, oklahoma.247sports.com, as the Jim Knowles saga starts to wind down, we think.
Can I Can I ask you a question before we transition on? Because, there's going to hopefully be some sort of resolution by the time that this podcast airs next week, whenever you guys hop on Monday. What, in your opinion, is the best pivot move? Like, I think I've gotten a lot of questions personally about what should or would Oklahoma do if it doesn't go in their favor. And again, that's a big if. Mm-hmm. But just curious for your thoughts of like, okay, if Jim Knowles doesn't end up coming to Oklahoma, if Ohio State counters, Oklahoma should do blank.
It's a good question because, there's nothing even remotely close to as flashy or as splashy as getting Jim Knowles, right? And so I think probably, the pivot that is just to do what we kind of thought they would do, which is just to keep it in-house. And maybe you bring Wes Goodwin in. I don't necessarily think you have to bring him in as the DC, right? Maybe bring him in as linebackers coach or even an analyst or something if you want. You don't have to do that. I think James Skalski moving to linebackers coach is also totally plausible. And Brandon Hall or Todd Bates being the guy there. I mean, I think that's probably the way it'll go. Is that the best move? I don't know. But I think that's probably the most safe and just kind of simple move. Is that where you're at too? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's hard. It's tough because it's such a different, and we talked about this last week, whereas the move to get Jim Knowles would be such a drastic change from what they've done the last couple of DC hires. And so if it doesn't get them, do they still try to do something like that? Or they just kind of go back to what we're more used to seeing, which is someone Brent knows, someone who work underneath them, that sort of thing. Because it's a good question because there's just nothing that you can do that would match the headline grabbing of that Jim Knowles would. So that part of it is where it gets tough.
Yeah, I personally, I think that everyone's going, because like I said, like everyone's kind of curious what Oklahoma will end up doing, because it felt like for a while what they were supposed to do is now like the backup options.
Yeah.
But because this is drawn out so long, like, is it as easy as just going to your original pivot points? One thing I kind of pointed out in a story I wrote last night that I think is, I'm not saying this is a driving factor. I just think it's something to think about. Oklahoma's getting ready, and we're going to talk about it. Oklahoma's getting ready to have 2 junior day visit weekends on campus, and they're sending the coaching staff out and about to in-home visits. And we're going to talk about all that here on today's show. But I think that's important to consider because, especially when you've got guys on campus, in your facility, in those rooms, you want to be able to sell a vision to these guys because it feels like the next few months from a recruiting standpoint are going to be as difficult as ever, considering the on-field product that was just put in place, but also the importance of getting a quality recruiting class for the future of this staff and this program. For me, I think if I get word from Jim Knowles before this weekend, when all these recruits are on campus, I think just hopefully seeing if Brandon Hall would take the defensive coordinator job would go a long way. I think that would go a long way for the players in the program. I think that would go a long way for the players being recruited by this program because Brandon Hall is so highly thought of. Mm-hmm. And if that's not something that he wants to do, the more that I've thought about it, like going after someone like Wes Goodwin is not going to be the splashiest of hires, and I get it. But I think having someone who can at least give you some resemblance of a Zach Alley or even a Jim Knowles, and that Wes Goodwin knows what Brent wants to do defensively. If that's the closest thing you can get to letting Brent be the head coach of the program, I'm fine with both of those moves. I think I'm curious to see if it doesn't shake out the way that Oklahoma wants it to in getting Jim Knowles, what they feel is more appropriate for the program and those individuals that we just mentioned.
Could be interesting. It's crazy. We're already January 22nd. It's been almost a month since Zach Alley left. And
that's wild.
Yeah, it is crazy. And it feels like we're winding down, and we'll find out soon enough, hopefully. And we plan to hopefully have an instant reaction show. We'll see the timing of it, or is it kind of the mercy of when news breaks, but that's the tentative plan. If and when we get a DC hire here in the next couple of days or weekend or whenever. All right, let's do some recruiting. We talked about it a little bit already. We kind of touched on it. The Junior Day weekend, or one of a couple that you mentioned there, we have coming up, but a big one this weekend. A lot of guys coming to Norman. Obviously, we mention this every time there's a big visit weekend. Sooners Illustrated, Oakland.247sports.com. Become a VIP member. Collin always does a great job of getting the full visitor list together for these weekends. And obviously, there's tons of intel baked into that, and there will be more throughout the weekend, all over with these big visit weekends. But we do want to preview it a little bit here on the podcast. Collin, we'll start offensively. Some names here that jump out to you that are of intrigue as we start to shift, obviously, to these future cycles, 2025 in the rearview mirror, and start to look ahead, obviously, to these next couple as Oklahoma starts to make some waves there. What are some offensive names you're watching for?
Yeah, I want to start at the receiver spot because I think that this weekend is going to be one that helps shape the 2026 class at receiver. You know, it's interesting. I think that in 2026, talking to folks across the country, kind of the consensus, at least for now, is that at offensive tackle and wide receiver, the talent level across the board in that class may not necessarily be as high as what was just seen in 2025. And recruiting, you're labeled in cycles for a reason. It's a cycle from a class standpoint, but it's very cyclical in nature. Sometimes you have classes full of really good talent in position, and other times not so much. I think it's clear to me, especially in the South Central region, a lot of programs are looking at 2026 and saying, receiver's going to be tricky. Like, we really have to figure out which wideouts we like. And I think for Oklahoma going into this weekend, you've got a lot of players at that position that are pretty talented. A couple out-of-state kids that I'm keeping an eye on from very different portions of the country. Daniel Odom out of the great John Bosco High School in California, and then Jabari Brady out in the state of Florida. Two guys, I believe, in kind of four-star territory, really talented players. I believe Jabari Brady was just out there with us in San Antonio. When you've got Cali and Florida represented, I mean, it goes to show you that Oklahoma is going to be flexible in terms of recruiting territory this time around, where they go get those wideouts. But then in-state wise, like, at least for now, seems like Mason James is getting ready to be on campus. Obviously, Norman North receiver, high four-star caliber talent. And I'm going to talk about him more in a second for one of the other segments we're getting ready to do. But Daniel Odom, Jabari Brady, California and Florida, respectively. We'll see what Oklahoma can accomplish with these guys. It came out that they were getting ready to visit. It sounds like Jaden O'Neal has been involved with both of these individuals, and Jaden O'Neal will be on campus for this Junior Day. So he's going to help recruit a couple of these receivers. And then the other guy I wanted to mention real quick, it seems right now at receiver, Oklahoma's expecting Aljor Miles to be on campus this weekend. Big dude out of Kaufman. I saw him this past season. Someone who could play that perimeter receiver. I wouldn't be shocked if he bulks up and becomes kind of like a flex tight end. He is someone who Oklahoma has already established firm contention with. And I think there's an argument to make that Oklahoma might be in the driver's seat here. So I'm fascinated to see how it goes with that core. And then the last name I want to mention real quick before I skip out, Davian Gross. I wrote an article about him the other day. It seems like as expected. He told me when he was in San Antonio that Oklahoma had just called him asking when he was going to visit again. I encourage folks to go read that piece that I put together on him. He had some really cool stuff to say. And Davian Gross, Oklahoma, Texas A&M battle shaping up there, and Oklahoma's going to have an ability to potentially make a move with him if he gets to campus this weekend. Not a ton right now as far as offensive line. I mentioned quarterback's going to get taken care of with Jaden O'Neal being there. Puleliete Primus out of Midland is going to be there. He's someone that Oklahoma is very high on. I think Noah Best should be there as well. So two interior offensive linemen that Oklahoma is very high on. A running back, though, Caden Jones, sounds like KD is going to be back on campus. And then I'm going to talk about this guy more here in a second, but folks may remember a player that I'm very high on in Rylan Morris, the positionless football player that is a running back, wide receiver type committed to Baylor.
Yeah.
I'll have more on him in a second, but it sounds like Rylan Morris coming to Norman is going to be a thing. So that's some of the offensive guys that will be around campus, and there will be more that I'll share on the visitor list published on Sooners Illustrated very soon.
It's funny, too. You mentioned Jaden O'Neal, obviously going to be there, and he's been very involved, especially with a couple of those wide receivers. I know Mason James has been someone he's helped kind of push for. Obviously, someone we know very well, right down to just a stone's throw away at Norman North. We've done this, though. It's so funny with the quarterbacks, as we did this exact thing with Kevin Sperry, with Jackson Arnold, Michael Hawkins a little bit, even going back to guys like Caleb Williams. Like, you get that quarterback, he's your centerpiece, and he kind of helps assemble the class around him. It's probably very encouraging if you're an OU fan to see Jaden O'Neal taking that upon himself to help do that as well. Obviously, we've talked about Jaden a bunch of times on the show. We all think he's going to be a stud. But you loop in the fact that he's kind of helping piece the team around him. That gets you excited, certainly about the future. And obviously, Emmett Jones has recruited very well since he's been here, and so we'll see what they can do. I'm very interested in those wide receiver names that you mentioned. Defensively, obviously, a ton of momentum on defense right now. Something we don't really talk about that often that we probably should is the fact that Brent Venables is going into year 4, and obviously he's had the DC turnover, but the rest of the staff has been the same. He's had Todd Bates, Brandon All, Jay Valai, Miguel Chavis with him every step of the way since he's been in Oklahoma. Obviously, the defense had a great year. Everyone's really excited about next year. So I would think, and you could say much better than I, but I would think that defensively, Oklahoma would have a ton of momentum, a ton of cachet on the recruiting trail right now, considering the stability and how well they're performing and all that good stuff, putting guys in the NFL now with Danny and Billy and Ethan. Defensively, some names that you're watching for coming into town this weekend that are of intrigue.
Yeah, I want to start with Sincere Johnson.
Great name.
He is awesome name. He is a 2026 linebacker, and our own Tom Lloyd just put up a piece this morning about Sincere, so you can read that up on the site. He is expected in town this weekend. He had some stuff to say about Oklahoma specifically, and almost exactly to your point, Sincere talked a lot about Brent Venables' track record of developing the linebacker spot and having those players go to the NFL, and his time at Clemson was even brought up. So go check that piece out. Sincere Johnson is really talented player. We have him ranked at number 132 in the country. He's out of Cleveland, Ohio. So Oklahoma competing with someone like Ohio State, for example, at the linebacker spot. That's might have the times have changed. I hope I'm saying this correctly, and I'm beating myself up because I had the pronunciation guide from the All-American Bowl, and then I love my wife to death, but I'm sure relatable content. My wife threw away my pronunciation guide, and now I don't know how to say this name. Valdon Sone is a defensive lineman. So let me try and tell you guys the story of Valdon Sone. He was with us at the All-American Bowl. He's a 2026 recruit, but he played in the game. So he is from Germany, I want to say. No, born in Sweden and is of Cameroonian descent. This kid grew up playing soccer. He participated in taekwondo, jiu-jitsu. This guy does it all. And he is 6'3", 320 pounds. 6'3", 320 with soccer, jiu-jitsu, and taekwondo background. That's what you look for in a defensive tackle specifically, right? But this guy has really become, I would say, one of the most stock-up recruits in the country, especially in 2026. We have him as a 4-star recruit right now. I think he has a legitimate chance to go up in the rankings considering what he accomplished in front of all of us at 24/7 Sports at the All-American Bowl. He was a standout all week in practices. I believe he had a quarterback pressure in the actual game, but he was all over the field throughout the week. He is out in Virginia and helped win a state championship out there. He also played in the IFAF European Junior Bowl. I'm learning all of this stuff for the first time about him. So he helped Team Sweden take down Denmark to win the title. And he was also part of an international combine and bowl game in 2023. And apparently our director of scouting, Andrew Ivins, back then named him the alpha dog of the event. So this guy is, I'm telling you, he has been stock up for years and then just showcased it in front of all of us against some of the nation's best in the All-American Bowl. Oklahoma is involved here along with Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Nebraska. I think he just got a Penn State offer, I want to say. Texas A&M is involved as well. I believe he just visited Gainesville the other day. I think Florida had him out for its junior day. So long story short, this guy is garnering attention from across the country. International prospect that has already come into the attention of some of America's finest programs. I was told that Oklahoma is very hopeful he makes to campus. And if he does, that's significant because I've heard that Daniel Akinkunmi knows Valden. I don't know to what capacity. I'm still figuring that out. I was wanting to talk to Valden more, but then I got tasked with like height, weight, hand, wing measurements all week at the All-American Bowl. So just doing what I can for the team, right? But anyway, it sounds like if Oklahoma can get him to visit, there is a baked-in familiarity advantage here with potentially Daniel Akinkunmi helping to host him. We'll see if he makes it to campus. A couple other guys defensively that I think stand out. It sounds like there's a chance that a couple of Texas A&M commits are going to be on campus. So Rylan Morris committed to Baylor on the offensive side. He might be visiting this weekend. Sounds like Markel Ford out of Mesquite Horn High School and then Ryan Gilbert out of North Forney, formerly of Mesquite Horn. He is a corner. Markel Ford is like a safety linebacker hybrid, both committed to the Aggies. They might be there. Taj Overton, a Wasso defensive lineman. Love this guy. I've talked about him a lot. It sounds like he might be there as well. So Oklahoma potentially getting one of its top in-state targets on campus. And then Caden Hall. So Caden Hall is the last guy I want to talk about, and there are a few other names. But Caden Hall, last year, if you'll remember, I made the trek out to Atlanta for the Under Armour Combine in Carrollton, Georgia. And Caden Hall was at that event, and I met him there and talked to him. He only had about 5 offers at the time, I want to say. And I was like, dude, big fan of your game. Watched the tape. It checked out. Put some stuff out there. Tweeted about him, whatever. Sent some feelers out to some folks in the college game. Fast forward, I think like a month or two later, and he got that Oklahoma offer. And I'm not going to lie, I was feeling myself a little bit. But Caden Hall is awesome. And this is someone who's going to command attention from a lot of high-profile programs in the Southeast. Let me double-check my work here. Yeah, 6'3", 195 pounds at safety. That's a big dude running around. And I think he has the ability to play all 3 safety spots in Oklahoma's system. I know Florida is very high on this individual. I think Oklahoma has a chance to create some in waves here. Anyway, Caden Hall, someone that it just feels like a full circle moment for me specifically, kind of vouching for this individual and now seeing him visit Oklahoma specifically. When I was just putting him out there as a prospect, it's very cool. And I'm happy for Caden and interested to see how that goes. I know I said that's the last guy, but one guy I did want to mention before I get out of here because I feel like I would have been remiss. Braden Presley out of Bixby. Sounds like another Presley is, obviously he's going to be recruited, but another Presley is going to be catching the attention from Oklahoma. Big defensive back. He's, I think, 6'2", a good framed player, and I know a lot of people are high on him. So Braden Presley potentially going to be in Norman as well, and I think that Oklahoma has a chance to really gain some momentum with this guy. So stay tuned with another one of the Presley brothers as well.
Yeah, the Presley train just keeps on keeps on churning. I'm sure the other schools up in Tulsa probably just there's another. They just never ending. There at Bixby. Like I said, you mentioned Taj Overton, another guy familiar with, really talented player up my alma mater in Owasso up in Tulsa. So
there you go.
Big names there. And it's a big weekend. Collin again has the full list on Sooners Illustrated, and tons of intel will be there this weekend as it plays out. And it's a big visit weekend for Oklahoma as they start to really, like we said, kind of full. They already have been, but 2025 in the rear view now, signing day, all that good stuff. 2026, the main focus for us and for Oklahoma now. Moving forward, and on that note, we had some in-home visits over the last week or so. I'm sure anyone on social media or anything probably saw Brent Venables. You saw some Miguel Chavis, some DeMarco Murray, among others. Some staff members out visiting some guys in home. Obviously, everyone coming to Norman this weekend. But what are some visits that caught your eye, whether it's from the head man himself or one of the assistants that you thought was of particular note as Oklahoma sent out headed out for some in-home visits over the last week?
Yeah, so let's start with a guy that I mentioned briefly, Rylan Morris, the Baylor commit. So I find this situation very interesting. The long and short of it was Oklahoma was very involved early on in Rylan Morris recruitment. And I thought that OU was going to have a chance to really, I'm not going to say close his recruitment down, but it felt like there for a while the Sooners were very close to the top of his process. And I give all the credit in the world on that front to DeMarco Murray. I know DeMarco's very high on Rylan Morris, as he should be, but I know DeMarco and Rylan have built a strong bond, and I think that DeMarco was really pushing for Rylan Morris. Some things transpired, and I think Rylan Morris inevitably was led to Baylor, but now DeMarco is able to be back on Rylan Morris, and it sounds like not only DeMarco Murray gets to go after a player he's always really liked again, but it sounds like Ben Arbuckle too is getting involved here with Rylan Morris. And I think that's very significant because when the play caller, the guy overseeing your system, sees a player and says, we need to go circle back on that guy, I personally believe that we're about to begin, or we're on the verge of Oklahoma getting very, very heavily involved again with Rylan Morris. And so keep an eye on this guy. It was not necessarily a certainty that he was going to be at junior day this weekend. And then I got another call last night essentially saying, all right, Rylan's in, he's going to go to junior day at OU. And if things go well, folks, Oklahoma's starting to press Rylan Morris a little bit. I think that effort could pay off if this weekend's event goes in Oklahoma's favor.
And Morris,
we'll see.
You mentioned him, but for fans four-star prospect. He's a Baylor commit, but he's a top 200 player for us. This is a legit prospect, and one to note there.
We have him at number 177 in the country. Yeah. He is ranked as a wide receiver. He's one of the top 30 wide receivers in the country, but he plays running back as well. And I would make you an argument that the two most impressive players of that skill set who are truly positionless, Oklahoma is heavily in on them both now, and that is Davian Gross and Rylan Morris. And I love that approach personally. As someone who buys into the positionless theory, if you're going to go after guys like Rylan Morris and Davian Gross who can carry the ball for you and catch the ball for you, and they embrace things like pass protection too, I love the approach. I really do. Moving on, though, staying on DeMarco Murray, he was active. Another guy I want to bring up, because I don't think I've been able to talk about this guy yet. Landon Williams-Callis is one of the top two running backs in the country. For us at 24/7 Sports, he is number one nationally at that position. Really darn good player. He's 5'7" and 180 pounds. And I know what people out there are going to say. How can the number one running back in America be 5'7" and 180 pounds? So Landon Williams-Callis is cousins with a couple of very familiar faces who were undersized players. He's cousins with Jaquiz Rogers and James Rogers out of Oregon State, if you'll remember. Electric playmakers, guys that sort of defied the odds in terms of their size. But
Jaquiz, good pro career with the Falcons for a while.
Very good pro career. And Jaquiz Rogers, James Rogers were dynamic. And I think that's some of what you see in Landon Williams-Callis. On top of that, though, his uncle, Michael Lewis, was a 2002 NFL draft pick of the Philadelphia Eagles. He played in the league for a while. He was a all Big 12 selection back in the day at Colorado, if I remember correctly. So Landon Williams-Callis comes from football, like a true football family at the highest of levels. And he is the number one running back in the country himself, because he's probably next in line to go find his way to the NFL himself. He just helped Richmond Randall High School, which is a high school, by the way, Josh, that's only about 3 years old. I want to say they just started up. They just won a state championship against like arguably the best defense in Texas high school football in South Oak Cliff. They have the best defensive coordinator in the state in Kyle Ward. Landon Williams-Callis ran for 101 yards and a touchdown in that game, and it was hard earned because Sock was keyed in on him, to say the least. Landon Williams-Callis has gone on the record and said that he's very high on DeMarco Murray as a coach because of what DeMarco has done as a running back in the NFL and in college himself. Landon Williams-Callis, coming from a family that featured multiple NFL players, he probably wants to get coached by someone who's done it himself as well, and that is DeMarco Murray to a T. So
we've heard that before. We've heard that before.
Exactly. It's an advantage of having someone like DeMarco Murray on your staff, and I think it's already kind of paying off here with Landon Williams-Callis. The other contenders there, I think, are Texas A&M, Baylor, and Oregon. Also is very high on Landon Williams-Callis. I want to mention Bill Bedenbaugh got out to see a couple guys out in the Southeast. Desmond Green is an offensive lineman out in South Carolina. He's 6'4.5", 354 pounds. That'll do it. I've heard he was potentially going to end up coming to Oklahoma's junior day this weekend, but he's instead just sticking in state. I think he's going to South Carolina's junior day weekend as well. There are a ton of other junior days in the same weekend. So some of these guys are getting into conflicting schedules, and Bill Bedenbaugh was able to see Desmond Green in home against someone who was potentially going to make it a Norman. So good thing that Bill got out there to see him. He saw Chancellor Barclay out in Florida, someone who just put Oklahoma in his top 10, if you buy into top schools list. So a couple big men there. Emmett Jones saw Mason James, like I mentioned earlier, and then he saw Jaden Warren. We just talked about Jaden Warren related to Kyler Murray. I put an article up on him the other day, also a piece that I encourage folks to read. Jaden Warren, one of my favorite receivers in 2026. And to be quite honest with you, I personally believe Oklahoma should be pressing on these two receivers specifically because, again, in a cycle that's not necessarily as receiver heavy as we've seen in others, you really got to pick and choose your spots. Oklahoma, I mean, they're obviously prioritizing these two, but it's good to see Oklahoma having that awareness and getting after guys like Mason James and Jaden Warren when you probably need to find a way to get some of those top tier talents. So those are a couple of the offensive guys that I wanted to mention real quick as far as some guys they were able to see in person and in home visits.
What about on the defensive end? Because like we said, or like I kind of mentioned before, we saw even Brent Venables obviously getting out there with, I think he was with Miguel Chavis, I want to say, on at least one or two home visits. JP Lawson was with him too. What about some of the guys on the defensive side as BV himself getting out and visiting some players and some names to note there?
Yeah, I'm going to just quickly mention Jake Kroll. He is a edge rusher at IMG Academy. Obviously, Oklahoma has recruited IMG Academy for a long time, but I think that this Brent Venables staff, Miguel Chavis, Todd Bates, they've done an excellent job of really creating those inroads into IMG and getting those players to buy in. David Stone, you went and got him at IMG, but you had that. To get a guy like Jaden Jackson out of IMG was huge, and now you're really sort of benefiting from some of that. Jake Kroll, he's the number 56 overall player in the country for us, 24/7 Sports, and you mentioned it. They brought the whole crew. Chavis and Todd were there. Brent was there. JP Lossman was there. They all went to check in with him. And Jake right now is talking about Oklahoma in the same vein as Ohio State, Miami, and Michigan as kind of his top group. And so keep an eye on Jake Kroll. I think that's an interesting one to track. I know that Brandon Hall, he just went by and saw, let me make sure I get this name correctly, a young linebacker that I'm going to put on my radar currently, DJ Ackerson out at Putnam City High School.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah. Have you heard about this kid?
Somewhat.
Yes.
Yeah. He's a name that's, kind of making the moves, rising name.
Yeah. So Brandon Hall was just out at Putnam City High School, and he was checking in with DJ Ackerson. This is a linebacker at about 6'2" and 195 pounds. I watched the tape. I liked it. I think this is a player who could pick up his offer from Oklahoma very soon, as long as he continues on the upward trajectory. So Brandon Hall stopping by an in-state school. And then I wanted to mention, this happened a little while ago, but another thing that kind of ties all this together. I think a week or two ago, Jay Valai went out to Lakeview Centennial to see Montre Jackson. Montre Jackson is a 2027 corner who we've talked about, I think, a time or two. Oklahoma offered Montre very early on. People might remember Montre because I'm not going to say I found the kid, but I was probably one of, if not the first recruiting reporters to say, like, Montre Jackson is a dude. Oklahoma offered early. I know Montre and Tristan Haynes have gotten to know each other very well. And I think Montre, from what I've heard, could potentially be in Norman this weekend for the junior day as well. So tying it all together, a lot of recruiting activity. They're going to continue these in-home visits. You'll have this junior day this weekend, and then there's going to be a smaller one to start the month of February on February 1st. There's only a couple of names that have been confirmed for that one, but not only good to see high school recruiting return, visit weekends return, but man, it almost feels like years since we've talked about in-home visits being a thing, really. Yeah. And cool to see guys getting in-home with parents and families and stopping by schools, because I think that's such an integral part of the recruiting process.
Kind of amazing, too. It gives you an extra appreciation for the fact that on top of this, specifically with Brent Venables, the rest of the staff, it's kind of, I'm sure they're kind of laser vision on their thing. But for Brent Venables also trying to hire a DC right now while he's doing this, it's kind of amazing sometimes when you kind of sit back and look at, especially like the head coach, everything that's under his umbrella that he has to kind of balance, and obviously his personal life. I mean, it's gives you appreciation for it every once in a while.
Yeah.
You see he's out there visiting kids, and cool to see. I think that's it. Obviously, very good show. Had a lot of recruiting there, and everything up the latest on the Jim Knowles stuff. And we'll sit back and wait to see what ends up happening there. But as I said, kind of off the top, whenever we know, you'll know over at Sooners Illustrated, Oklahoma.247sports.com. And we'll try and maybe get an instant reaction show together as well. After we get some news there, and we're kind of at the mercy of timing on that. Collin and I are both busy the next couple of days, but we'll see what we can work out there, again, depending on timing. But that's it for now. Back on Monday with James and Tom and myself. Obviously, recap the weekend for hoops and to continue our position report series and everything else going on with OU football. And Collin and I will be back with you presumably next Thursday to recap Junior Day weekend and hit on some of the other latest recruiting and team news next Thursday. CK, appreciate you. Have a good week. I know you got Shrine Bowl coming up and other things to keep you busy. It's just kind of keep it one thing after another right now. So stay with it, and we'll talk to you next week, man.
Yes, sir. You are going to be on the call this weekend, right?
Yes.
Give me a rundown of the games you'll be on so the good folks in the state of Oklahoma can listen to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, most people I'm sure know I broadcast high school sports for the Oklahoma Sports Network, and we have the Carl Albert tournament, their home tournament. We've aired that the last few years. That starts tomorrow, which is why I asked Collin to move the show up, because the game started at noon tomorrow. And It's a great field, always is, as you would imagine, Collin, for Carl Albert's home basketball tournament. It's a great field, big name programs in there all over the place. Get a bunch of the Edmond schools come play, and obviously Carl Albert's in there, Dell City's in there. I mean, it's programs that are in the state tournament basically on a year-to-year basis. So it's a great field. We'll fire up tomorrow. I've got Edmond North, Norman North on the boys' side tomorrow. It should be a great game. Very excited for that. So it's a great week of action, though. But it's a lot. It's a lot of games. So I'll be busy. You'll be busy, but we'll be ready. We'll be ready for Jim. If he's ready, we'll be ready.
Yeah, Shrine Bowl camps, Junior Day. I've got a coaching convention too. So Josh is on the grind. We're working, and hopefully Jim Knowles takes that into consideration one way or another, because I would appreciate it. And I would appreciate you out there, folks, if you hop on with us. At Sooners Illustrated, 30% off, still available right now. And we're having fun with all this stuff and more, because it's an interesting off season, to say the least.
It feels like we have really, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like we've scooted through January. Like January is kind of winding down. It's going to be spring ball. We're going to be kicking off the next season. It feels like.
Yeah, I'm shocked how far into the month and the year we already are. I feel like this time last year drug out exponentially.
Yeah.
And now we're pretty much getting closer to the quote unquote second signing day. I got to start prep for that too, for whatever that's going to be. So
who knows? We'll talk to you next week. That's it for now. For Collin Kennedy, Josh Callaway. We'll see you next time right back here on Monday for the next edition of the Sooners Illustrated podcast.